Hello. I just wanted to take a little bit of time and walk you through some of the examples that we have on our website at a very high level. Again, I think the best way to really get into the specifics of your school is for us to connect, but let's take a look at what we have here for some of the data that's been requested by other schools and districts. Walking through this first page, what you will see is mostly assessment data, state data, also could be some of your testing supporting systems, NWA, Renaissance, STAR. A lot of the data is the same iReady. It's just different names. We can format it any way that is needed. And a lot of requests come in. You will see on this sheet here. So a basic breakdown what's high achieving by grade. Some schools districts define this a little bit different. Usually it's around the 50th percentile, and you would see just here's an example by grade and what that trend performance was like against other times in the school year. And anything above some of the lines that are on the bar graph you could see as overperformance, and anything below would be your underperformance. As you continue, just quintile performance, which breaks it down into 5 different groups of performance. That's a very easy request. Projection on state assessments. This can be as complex or as straightforward as you want. Some of the testing data that's provided by vendors, they provide their own projections to how students will perform on it. There are other more, like I said, complex ways where we could take multiple assessments that are used throughout the year to gauge improvement or performance. And we can start to align and see what some of those performances are. Just as an FYI, most assessments that lead up to performance on state exams, kids tend to do a little lower on. Kids actually do a little bit better for the actual state assessment. So game day, they tend to perform a little bit better than on some of the assessments that you will see throughout the year. So if you look at this at the beginning, a lot of this would be more administrative and school leadership driven. When we get into some of these strand analysis, this would be what would help teachers. What are the performances that we're seeing here? What percentage of students are hitting some of these strands on their different tests? So if you look at this, it's broken down by grade, by different strands that are on the test. And it just, again, another way for us to triangulate data to show how students are performing in a snapshot. And each one of these tests, that's exactly what it is a snapshot. Especially on the math side, since COVID, you can see considerable gaps within performance, but maybe the instructional cycle hasn't been all the way taught for some of these strands throughout the year. So again, when you're at a beginning or midway point, you may see some underperformance on material that isn't taught. Reading tends to be a little bit more on the skill side. So when we look at these numbers, these should be a little bit more accurate as to where kids are in the moment across the entire instructional spectrum. And then some of the other things that we provide, what are some of the poorest reading strands as a group, but also by student. Some of that information is, a lot of that information is provided for schools and districts to let them know, look, this is what the greatest number of your students struggled with or had success with on the assessment. And again, all these are just data points and snapshots for what's to come for the rest of the school year, or as a summative assessment at the end of the school year. Cohort is another one that really interests schools and districts, because you can track that performance over time. So how, as these kids move through the different grades, how does their performance improve or regress? So that, to me, has been something that has been of really strong interest. And again, we're showing visuals here just one way for a website. So these can be presented any way that you would prefer. and it also makes it a little bit easier to put on a website. So just for general purposes, don't think that this is the end. This is actually very much just the beginning. Growth, you will see some of these are growth measures for the entire school by content area, and then also you'll see that by grade, broken out by subgroup as well. Anything that's captured at subgroup level is very much possible. Black or African American, Hispanic, um, and then free and reduced lunch, students with IEPs, and ELL, English proficiency. Those tend to be some of the subgroups that schools are really interested in. If that is something that you want to explore, that's not a problem at all. And you can see these growth numbers are kind of analyzed in that specific way. Growth, as we always say, that's more your short-term metric to kind of give you an idea of where students are at. Achievement is the more long-term metric, only because achievement is far more sturdy and reliable from test to test. Hopefully it improves, and in a lot of cases it does. Growth tends to be how their goals are met at that point, but they can kind of change as you go through. So that just kind of gives you an idea there for some of the growth statuses, as we said, broken down. One of the other numbers that you see here on a 1 to 99 scale would be percentile rank. Some schools prefer this over, say, the high achieving percentage, only because that gets at every individual student's exact score. 1 being the lowest, 99th being the highest. And here, this is a breakout for one school example template for general education versus special education, and free and reduced lunch versus non-free and reduced lunch. That tends to be, especially after COVID, a major interest for some schools to see how economically disadvantaged students can possibly close some of these gaps that may have manifested since COVID. And then here's just some breakout for state assessments by some of the subgroups. We have that information here just to show you that that is very much available. Again, this is just a general template. Anything that's collected in the test can be presented any way that you want. So this is the first link for just a general test session example. Okay. Let's go to student dashboard. Student dashboards really in high demand. What would these be used for? So the first one, the test session example, what we looked at, that would be something simple for leadership, for teachers, for teams to see where you're at and what are some of the instructional suggestions to help going forward. And I said there's other metrics and everything that we collect that go back years on that information to help give you an idea of where the students are at. This here would be something more for meetings, for individual students that you're trying to collect information over time. We've also had this sent as almost like a report card or a status update a couple times a year that went to families. And anytime that there's a conference, it's basically what you would do. You would just hit one drop down and all this information would update, and it would just give you an idea, all the information on the student. And everything that you see here, this is just for one exam or one assessment that you could put here. It'll give you like overall score, what's the level, what percentile are they in, and then these are some of the strands that they performed on it. So I think this one was for the iReady exam. But then you could also see this would be for your state exam. You would also see that same information that would populate how the students performed over the last 3 years. And if you had any other support services that you needed for students, I believe this school has a major English as a second language population. So WIDA was very much at the foundation of everything that they did. So that information was here for what their scoring performance was like. And since they used iReady a lot, they kind of wanted to see how many lessons did this student complete within iReady? How many minutes did they spend on it to justify, I think, some of the costs that they were considering on it. and then how many of the assessments were passed, not passed. We can really collect anything. This would be the second page here, but literally in a lot of cases, what you see with something like this is you're changing one drop down for a student. All this information changes, exports with PDF, and you can provide this to a parent. Teachers can kind of start some of their assessment practices based off this information, or just understand performance at the individual level across multiple exams in one place. And that's really been something that schools have found to be helpful, that they don't have to scour for information for students in multiple areas. It all pulls into this one area and gives them that information that they need, whether talking to other educators, talking to parents, talking to students, whatever that may be. But this is certainly possible, if that's something that you're interested in. Outreach and assessing or evaluating the or not really student population, but teachers, parents, anyone else that has to be surveyed. That tends to be two of the major groups. I don't really have anything where students have one school that does something with student feedback, but in a lot of cases, parents are asked maybe once or twice a year, and teachers in some cases can be asked up to 3 times a year just to give quick feedback on how they feel about what's taking place at the school, dealing, I think, everything from safety and support to instructional matters and matters of dealing with the community. And again, with everything with data, the longer we capture that information, the better that data can be operationalized. And this is just one school that has provided surveying over time. And if you look at this 4 different times, and if you look at the scores, strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. And this information was given this past winter. It just gives you an idea of one example of one question and what that can look like and how these performance levels compare to previous years. And I think this is an important one sometimes when you can just group together how, at a general level, what some of that performance is, because, anytime that you're requesting feedback, some of that feedback can be inconsistent from one respondent to another. But again, stakeholder community, this has been something for accreditation matters that a lot of schools have really liked, because that can be part of the portfolio whenever they have to go back for accreditation, that it's something that they have formally and in writing with data reached out to other teachers and also the community. This one is a little bit more involved, dealing with different members of the school and what some of their performances were on or what some of their feedback was on some of these questions. So if you look at what some of the different time periods were versus what some of the different employees' positions in the school were, like I said, this one was a little bit more involved. It's followed the same strongly agree to strongly disagree, gives you the same percentage. And then here we broke it down, 5 being strong, 5 strongly agree, 2-1 strongly disagree. And we put that on a 5-point scale. So 5 strongly agree all the way down to 1 strongly disagree. And these would be some of your averages. And these were the average breakouts by the different groups within the school. So anywhere between 4.6, which is really strong, to a 3.43, which is not bad, but maybe there's some further investigating that could take place there. And here, this was the rank for all the questions. I believe there were, I want to say 12 questions on the survey. And this is what the rank was for the different groups out of 13, actually, I should say. And what the best performing and lowest performing questions were. So again, it's not so much the content here as just showing you what is possible. And no two schools have exactly the same data that they prioritize or capture. So really the goal here is to show you that anything that you want to capture certainly can take place. So if you have any questions on this or want to discuss anything that you see in this, definitely feel free to reach out and connect, and we can definitely take a look at possible next steps to make sure that your data needs are served.